Hey guys, and welcome to the show today. Should be a nice show. Please let us know if you have any questions for us that we can go over and cover. But today we're just going to go over the frequently asked questions that we cover a lot here on goBILDA. Of course, because this is kind of a more intimate stream, we've got some really cool giveaways for you guys that do decide to tune in and watch and enter a giveaway. The keyword today is merch. So make sure to get that into the chat. Make sure you're following in order to win. Let's see here. So today we've got a few different really kind of questions that we get a lot here at goBILDA that we want to be able to cover and go over with you guys live, so you can ask any follow-up questions or anything like that for this stream. We can kind of go over our giveaways quick here. We'll switch over to the giveaway view. So we've got a goBILDA TV hat, which I'm wearing one as well. We've got some Mechanum coasters. We've got some really cool worm gear stickers that are kind of harder to see, but they're really nice and simple. We've got some 2106 Rex shafting stickers, which I really like. Super neat. We've also got some Beeline stickers for the Beeline chassis. And we've got some 5203, oh, there we go, motor stickers, 8Rex output motor stickers. So we'll probably pick a few different winners today, and we'll send you guys some stickers. We'll send you a hat. Make sure you get all of your toolboxes and all that stuff. You've got a lot of stickers, and you've got a sweet hat out of the deal too. Hey all you guys, thanks for saying hi on the chat. Robot Scout Squad, Splice Flight, all that stuff. Wheel coasters kind of fire. I agree, I really like the wheel coasters. I've never owned a coaster before, but I really like them. I use it all the time now. So, one of the first topics I want to talk about today is in our tips and tricks section. Tech tips section, that's what I meant. And that is Mechanum wheel orientation. Mechanum wheels are an interesting beast for sure, and they are really tricky. And there are a bunch of different things that can affect how straight your chassis strafes. The number one thing that I see, and I go to every competition I go to, I see about one team with their Mechanum wheels on in the incorrect orientation. So, as you can kind of see here, here we go. There are each set of rollers on these Mechanum wheels should be pointed about toward the center of the chassis. So you can see these up here all end up pointing toward the center, creating kind of an X profile when viewed from the top. This is the correct orientation for the top of your robot. If you flip this over, you get the other configuration you can most commonly make that will still kind of work. So that's where none of the rollers are facing another wheel. They're normally called an O configuration. So if I set this on the ground like so in the correct orientation, in order to rotate this chassis, each wheel has to spin, which in turn drives the miter gear that's driving it in this example and back drives the motor. This means if I locked up this motor, it's going to be a lot harder to rotate my robot. And that means that this robot's a lot more controlled by the user than otherwise. To contrast that, we'll flip this chassis over and we'll get the orientation we also see a lot. Now, if you're driving a straight line or you're strafing, this should be very, very similar. You can see the wheels will always spin when I'm moving in those directions. But it's when I rotate where you really see where you'll have issues. So I can now rotate this chassis without moving a single wheel. The only thing that's spinning here are the rollers, which means if somebody ran over and hit my robot, I'll just spin. Or if you're strafing and just a little bit of weight isn't quite balanced right, you'll oftentimes add a lot of rotation to your strafing and even to your forward and backward momentum. And if you are driving these wheels to turn, you'll turn really slow because you can just spin the rollers instead of really turning your robot. So the correct orientation, you get really nice controlled rotation. Your strafing is still nice and quick, and your forward and backward is still nice and quick. This is a tough thing to really experiment with. It takes a second, but it's really nice. The correct orientation is variable because it's Mechanum swerve. I guess if you did rotate each wheel, you could change the orientation. So yeah, that would be interesting. But you also could, if you wanted to, change, say, the ratio, the speed you're going at with that. Okay, here. X versus kind of O, yeah. 2 points would be the other orientation you could see there. So we'll kind of slide this up and we'll talk about the next thing on our list, which is when to use shims. This is a really quick question answer because the answer is pretty much all the time. And we'll talk about why. So we will switch to our super close-up debut camera here. And this is a fairly standard rotating assembly. You've got a piece of 2106 Series 8 Rex. It's in a bearing in the channel, you can see in there. And there's a bearing right here. So there's 2 points of contact, and that load is cantilevered out to the side. Now, these bearings have flanges toward the center of the channel. So I need to constrain it by pushing this hub against this bearing and by using the E-clip on the back of this 8mm Rex. So we will show you, the big thing here is that you need to put a shim between the hub and this bearing right here. Now what this shim does is it will push whatever you have right up against the face of that bearing, in this case it's a hub, away from the outer race of the bearing. So if I just were to put this hub right on there with no shim in between, it's very possible that the hub will contact the outer race of the bearing, which is the part of the bearing that doesn't rotate. We can rotate this and you can see there's an inner race that's supposed to rotate relative to the outer race, and the outer race will stay still. So if we were to take this hub, mash it up against the face of that bearing, and then lock it down, what'll happen is you will all of a sudden have a bunch of resistance because you've got a bunch of friction between the outer race of this bearing and the hub that it's spinning against. And if you just look at it like this, you don't notice a huge difference. Where you do start to notice a difference is if I go ahead and spin this. So this with no shim, it spins okay, but that's because there's very, very little load on this. If I were to hold and apply some vertical load to this, you can really start to feel that all of a sudden it starts to rub more. Now, if I remove this hub and I add the shim back in, you'll start to see where it really, really makes a difference in how freely this whole assembly spins. And like, it was definitely done spinning before. And this, like I mentioned, is the best case scenario for a no shim setup where there's very, very little load holding that hub against the bearing. But even in this situation, it's much, much better. It's still spinning like we talked about. So this is a really, really important thing. I noticed a lot of teams just miss it. I missed it when I first started working with goBILDA a lot for a few months before I realized, hey, this isn't quite right. So that's what's really important, along with making sure your shafts are fully constrained, all that kind of good stuff. Let's see, Dansman 805, to be honest, describing the correct orientation as X on top is, well, the most obvious way to describe it, kind of confusing because the actual reason X is on the top is good because it's O on the bottom. Yeah, the top of your chassis doesn't matter, just like you mentioned. It's all about what's actually contacting the ground, and in this case, you can look at the top of this chassis and see exactly why the rollers spin instead of the wheel when you're rotating it in the incorrect orientation. So in this orientation, we're looking at the top of the chassis, this is correct. But if we were looking up from the bottom of the chassis, this would be incorrect. And you can see the force vector that would cause me to rotate here is in this line, is in this plane. which is the same plane as these rollers are spinning. So the nicer your Mechanums are, the worse that incorrect orientation is, because if your rollers spin more freely, it starts to matter a lot more. And that's something that's just hard to explain to teams, especially if I'm at an event where I don't also have a strafer chassis just in my back pocket. I'd love to be able to bring a strafer chassis everywhere, but I don't think I can. I'll just have to start driving it to competitions, right? Are you going to talk about the less official goBILDA strats? I'm not today. I think that would be a really fun, show, like those illegal Lego building strategies, those YouTube videos. That'd be fun. A mini strafer, yeah, I need a pocket-sized strafer chassis, just like a kind of hold up in my back pocket for those applications. The next thing we're going to talk about today is when to use what kind of bearings. So there are most applications in goBILDA, you're going to end up using a radial bearing, which is a standard bearing like the flanged bearings and non-flanged bearings you can find on goBILDA, 1600 series, 1601 series, 1611 series bearings. And these are really great at taking radial load. So that is load in kind of the vertical direction as seen on this rotating assembly. That is what they're designed to do, and when constrained properly and used in correct circumstances, they can hold a lot of load, crazy amounts of load. Where they're not very strong is in the axial direction, in the thrust direction. So if I were to put a bunch of load on top of this spinning assembly, that's where those bearings can start to not feel very solid. If I stood on this, it would probably start getting not very smooth and potentially break. That's where thrust bearings are important. So we'll pull up the close-up view here and take a look. This is a thrust bearing. There we go. It is an 8mm ID bearing, and it's, as you can see here, the ball bearings in this bearing, instead of being set up to handle a radial load, are set up to handle a thrust load. So as you put more load, vertically in this case, down on this bearing, it's very smooth and you can feel that it's really designed for this load. This is a great example. This is a dual pattern pillow block, and it is designed with both radial and thrust bearings because it is designed to handle both radial and thrust loads. So if I were to replace this spinning assembly with this dual pattern pillow block, it's going to be a lot better at taking those thrust loads than this. So if I was making a turret, say, this would be a much better system to use. Now, its ability to handle thrust loads makes a thrust bearing a really good choice for gear drive assemblies and linear screw drive assemblies, specifically gear drive assemblies that create thrust loads. So things like worm drive gearboxes and miter and bevel gearboxes. That's where thrust bearings are really great because those gears create a lot of axial load, especially on a worm gear. Oftentimes it can be easier to move that worm linearly than it is to actually rotate the really oftentimes long arm on the end of that worm gear. So that thrust bearing makes that, even though you have a lot of linear force on that bearing, it keeps everything really smooth. Same thing with a lead screw. If you have a heavy load on a lead screw, you want a thrust bearing in there to make it really smooth despite that additional load. Thrust bearings oftentimes are best when you sandwich them against a piece of structure, like a channel, and you have your bearing on the far side. Putting them up against the face of a rotating bearing isn't optimal because you kind of end up in a situation where you're adding some additional friction in there compared to the inner race that should be spinning freely. But in most applications, if you're looking at a thrust bearing, it's going to be heavy duty enough that a little bit more friction is okay. Let's see here. Worm drive, sad face. Worm gears are great in some situations. One of my favorite applications for worm drives is hand crank mechanisms where you want to be able to crank something up and then forget about it and leave it there, because the big advantage that everybody knows about worm gears is that they don't like to back drive at all. They really want to stay exactly where they are, and they're really good at that because of the direction of load on those tooth profile. goBILDA 0 gears, I don't know what those are, I suppose. That is a new one for me. RR3 intake pivot. Be like, I'm also lost. I'm lost a lot on this today. Lift/climb mechanisms, yeah. Definitely all great places to use mechanisms like that. The next thing we're going to talk about today is tools, what kind of tools and when to use them. The big thing I see a lot of times when people are building their robots is using what I would consider not the correct kind of hex key. So a really important thing is I would recommend, if you can, always use a straight end hex key. This will get you a much more direct contact with the screw you're trying to drive, and you can get more of that key inside that screw head to be able to apply more torque. The flip side is a ball end. So the big advantage of a ball end is that you can get at it from more than from an angle, not from directly on. See, you can really drive this screw from a large angle, but because of that, you lose contact with that screw head. So if you really want to tighten something down, or if you think a screw is close to stripping out, that's where you really want to grab that hex head, that flat head, and give it a really nice amount of torque. This is especially important on smaller drive examples. Something like a 2.5 mil drive is much more susceptible to stripping out with a ball end. There is also always the possibility of breaking a ball end off of a hex key. I did that live one day and it was really embarrassing, where you just apply too much torque and it snaps at this neck right here, if this will focus. Yeah. So I'll definitely recommend using this almost as much as you can. I also want to talk about this little tool. It's my favorite tool addition to the goBILDA lineup recently, and that's for a few reasons. One of those is this access port. It's a 7mm combination hex wrench, so it's got a hex on either end, and it bottoms out a hex nut really nice. So I can drop a hex nut in here. There's a lock nut, and you end up with a really nice, really easy to use setup where you can get in a lot of really tight, tough to reach areas. Make it easy to use. Now, the reason there's this access hole back here is to let you use a really long screw. If you got a screw that was 60 mil long and you needed to thread a nut a long way onto that screw, that's what that is for. It also has one on this far side, but you notice it's not nearly as deep. I guess this one is an effectively infinite depth. This one only reaches about to that right there. So not as useful, but still very nice to have. This is my favorite. I use this thing all the time, and most of the time you can get definitely enough torque on things for FTC. I also hate it when I see teams using normal nuts when they could be using lock nuts. Lock nuts are awesome. These are nylocks, and they just really help lock things down and make sure it stays there in competition environments especially. That's really important. Shaking my head, not holding it with your fingers or needle nose pliers. I don't love pliers with lock nuts or nuts in general. I try not to as much as I can. Every tool is a hammer if you use it right. I would say I would say that's wrong. I don't know how you're using any tool, but I think unless it's a hammer, it's probably incorrect. But I definitely have done that before. I love the wrench. We have two. I do too. I also like that they're very comparable even to the flat wrenches that are super cheap. Lock nuts are annoying. They take more time, but I think they're totally worth it. Normal nuts are really annoying when they come undone. That's true. Parallel jaw pliers are really good. They are really cool. I've not really used them much with nuts, but they're really sweet. Another use of that top hole is sticking a T-handle Allen wrench through it or something to get a lot of torque with a wrench that's on the short side. Oh yeah, you totally could use it as a cheater bar. That's how I would know those. So yeah, If you say had, I need to switch over. Oh, sorry. There we go. I'd say this is a T-handle. Assuming this is a little short T-handle, you could stick this on the end and get some extra reach. Get I'd call it a cheater bar. Get more torque on a little screw. In this application, this much length is way overkill. You probably end up stripping this bolt, but you could get a lot of torque out of that for sure. That's a great use of that part. Can we get GM0 as the keyword for the giveaway? Maybe sometime. It'd be fun to have a Game Manual 0 stream on goBILDA TV. No, I was saying the other end. I'm not totally sure what you mean, I guess. I suppose you'll have to send me a picture. This maybe? I don't know. Anyway, that's fine. If you want to, you can send us a picture. Maybe we'll make it a product insight somehow. Why no KEPs metric nuts? I like lock nuts a lot more than KEP nuts. I haven't really seen the appeal of KEP nuts. I believe out there in the world somewhere there is a big study that NASA did on effectiveness of different mechanisms of nut retention, which is really cool. If I remember correctly, that ended up deciding that KEP nuts don't really help, which you can take that with as much salt as you want, but that's enough reason for me to want to use lock nuts all the time. I really like them. Please endorse GM0. We have in a blog post before. We're happy to help out wherever we can. Yeah, if there's any way GM0 needs some goBILDA support, we're happy to. The last thing we're going to talk about today is using channel and goBILDA components at weird angles, because this is something that a lot of teams have issues with. It's tough to do in goBILDA. It's because, excuse me, with the normal grid setup of channel, it's not very intuitive to be able to put things at weird angles, change the exact setup of things like that. So we're going to talk about how you do that today. Here we've got two really good examples. The first one being how to set strange angles. So as you can see in this assembly, we've got a piece of channel structure up here, the shooter, and we've got our base frame. Now these need to be at a really nice adjustable angle. So what we've done is we've bolted some bottom tapped 32mm clamps. We'll get these loosened up so you can see what's going on. We've bolted the legs of those to the channel. Yeah, there we go. And those are clamped around some go rail. Because that go rail is around surface and you got this clamp, you get this really nice ability to adjust it to whatever angle you need. This is what we did on the intake for the robot in 3 days and the shooter, because it is just so variable. You can dial in the exact angle you need, and it's really easy to adjust. Like as soon as I tighten up this other screw, we can set an angle and be really solid on it. And if you tighten these up nice, they do stay there. They're very solid. And you can leave them a little bit loose and still have some option to move it. The other thing is oftentimes you will want to be able to set something in goBILDA that's at a dimension that is not evenly divisible by 8, which is also can be difficult with just using channel and grid plate and stuff like that. And that's where I really like GoRail, because you can add some GoRail nuts and slide and lock things along the surface. That's what we have with this piece of channel. It's mounted to this go rail. If I wanted to say tension this string, I could pull this whole channel out, lock it in place, and be good to go. That's also how this whole assembly can slide and lock, is on go rail. The other way you can do slide and lock in goBILDA is back to clamping mounts on round tubing, such as GoTube. If I were to loosen these two screws back up, not tighten them, loosen them back up, I could then also slide this back and forth. So if I needed to slide it a little bit this way or a little bit this way, I can do that now without any, without having to move it exactly 8mm. This is especially useful on intakes and stuff like that when you're prototyping things out of goBILDA. Using GoRail and using GoTube and clamping mounts are really nice and really helpful. Let's see here. Pattern spacer plus clamping hub. That's a great one too, especially if you're using goRail. If you have goRail and you want to clamp around it on 32mm clamp, you can clamp around goTube. It does have a 32mm diameter, but I like putting a pattern spacer on the end, which is 32mm, and clamping onto that. I don't think I have a pattern. Oh, I do. We'll show that off to you guys. This is that setup, or you'd bolt this pattern spacer to your goTube or channel or whatever, and then clamp down on it with this 32mm 1400 series clamping mount. You also could use, say, a sonic hub in some applications, because those are also 32mm diameter. This can be really cool. And that is one of my favorite tips for working with goBILDA in FTC, because a lot of times you're working with objects that are outside of the metric system, or you're just trying to do something with a weird exact dimension. Before the goTube hack was invented, I remember 8375 trying to make an angled slide bot by mounting the slides on goRail. Yeah, so if I remember correctly, that probably would have multiple pieces of goRail vertically, and then a piece of channel in between those two pieces of vertical goRail, and each one will only have one screw and one nut. You could rotate that by sliding one up or sliding the other down. That's definitely an option. You can do that. I think you need 3 pieces of goRail, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. Yeah, so you need to be able to slide vertically, and you need to be able to slide your mounting points to get that angled slide action. But that's a good way to do that without a clamping mount. And sometimes having those multiple points of support are nice. Sweet. Looks like there are lots of guides that go over fasteners. That's awesome. One thing that I haven't seen a robotics team do yet that would be awesome is running wire through all their screw heads to make everything locked in place and never going tight or loose. That would be a pain if you ever had to change something on your robot, but it's very cool. Better angle mount. Looks like there's a cool... Okay, some interesting discussion on different ways to use goBILDA in the chat. That's what we always like to see. I don't know if I have a way to show it on stream, but there is an interesting 33.8 degree angle mount. It looks like just relying on a couple of holes on goBILDA channel lining up to make it so you can get an interesting angle there. If that works for you, it works. It's got 2 screws, so it would constrain it correctly. Let's see here. It looks like that will go ahead and roll for our giveaway. Like I said, we'll have a couple winners today. We'll have 2 people, and we'll send you a bunch of stickers. We'll send you a hat, and it'll be a lot of fun. Andrew asked what the tastiest Loctite flavor is. I've not ever tasted Loctite, but I like blue the most. Specifically, we have some 220 over here that I really like. That it's worked really well on every place I've used it. Red is another option. I've also used some red when I was in FTC. I didn't have good luck getting those screws out, but it did keep them there. That's the advantage of red Loctite. Okay, so it looks like we've got a bunch of people entered in the giveaway today. So we will go ahead and close our entries and pick a couple of winners. It looks like Danoik, I don't know how to say that, but you're our first winner. Shoot us an email to marketing@gobilda.com. Let them know you want your hat and stickers, and give them your email address and team number, all that kind of stuff. Looks like our second winner for today is Davin78. So same way to go about that there. We're really excited. Thank you guys for supporting the show and following and all that kind of stuff. I want a merch, yeah. It's more than a merch, I suppose, but that should be really fun and exciting. Dan's Van 805 LOL got so hyped for a second. Yeah, that's reasonable.
Hey, we got a question here from Spaceflight Seb, who said, any exciting new products soon? You never know.
I guess so. I guess there's going to be something. I don't know. Definitely thanks for asking. I never thought about asking that. Let's see here. I think that's about all I've got for the show today. Thank you guys for tuning in to today's show. It was a lot of fun. We're excited to see you back in a couple of weeks. As you know, we're going through a little bit of a rebrand. We're now calling the show FTC Friday because it's oftentimes on Fridays, with a couple notable exceptions. We're really excited to be able to keep bringing this show to you guys and having a lot of fun with it. Definitely let us know if you have any great ideas for show ideas in the future. I know Glitches just mentioned one in the chat, which I really love to see. And I'm really excited to talk to you guys again in a couple of weeks. Have a good one.